and welcome to the Think Tent, bright and early on a Tuesday morning at conference. You are really the bastions, I like to say, of the Conservative Party, coming at this time to discuss what is an extremely important subject, which is local authorities. And why is it important? Well, because across the country, local authorities are facing a challenging balancing act. From bin collections to adult social care, they're tasked with delivering vital services, but doing so under a growing amount of pressure and a growing web of regulations, with their hands increasingly tied by Whitehall and the central government. Meanwhile, most councils, as a result, are having to increase council tax by the maximum, with that being reported next spring as well. So what can local government do better? Can it be left to get on with the job? And should it be less micromanaged by the central government? And in doing so, perhaps we can see some more innovation, some more efficiency from them, and perhaps even, this might be a popular message in this tent, even lower council tax, which I'm sure we'd all like to be able to see. Now, we've got an excellent panel to discuss this, and I'm sure plenty more as well. We're going to start from the right to the left. So we have Councillor Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, who represents Hatch End Ward in the London Borough of Harrow. Next to him, we have Henry Hill, who's the Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Then directly next to me, we have Councillor Abby Brown, who's the Deputy Leader at the LGA Conservative Group. Then next to Abby, we have Jason Perry, who's the Executive Mayor at Croydon Council. And then at the far left of the table, we have Callum McGoldrick, who's a researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance. Now, just a few house rules. The way this is going to work, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to speak for roughly 5 minutes each, and then we're going to hand it over to you guys in the audience for a Q&A session afterwards. So, Matthew, do you want to get us going?
If I must do, thank you very much. For me, one of the things that I was thinking about when I wanted to talk today was around opportunity. So I'm just having a quick scan of the room. I think I might be the youngest. Just checking. Yeah, I think so. Okay, might not be the youngest anymore.
Almost.
Nearly. I think opportunity is a massive thing when we can try and make a difference, not only how we run councils, but also bringing up the next generation. So when I was 14 when I decided I wanted to be a local councillor. I know, most people wanted to be football stars. But I really wanted to just help and make a difference. By the time I ended up getting elected, it was 2022. I was the youngest councillor in Harrow's history, one of the youngest councillors in London and for our party. And the brochure that advised, if you want to become a councillor, here's the process to do it, said the average age of a Conservative councillor is 69 years old. I mean, at that point, I sort of thought I must be bringing the average down quite far. But when we talk about letting, councils go, set them free, I think a massive thing is about bringing in that new generation and giving them a reason to not only support the Conservatives, stand for the Conservatives, and give them that opportunity to excel. Now, I'm not in any way saying that all 17-year-olds should go run adult social care services in councils across the country. I'm not saying in any way that, sorry, but give young people with absolutely no experience the reins to the purse strings. I think there's a balance between the experience you've got, but also what you can bring. But just a couple of examples of what a young person naturally does that, if they're given the opportunity to, will excel at. So TikTok. I know most people have been told you have to get onto TikTok, you need to be doing TikTok, it's the way the new audience is and everything like that. Young people are already on it. We grew up with it. We literally grew up with social media. We know it like the back of our hands. We know the algorithms like no tomorrow. Give young people that opportunity to help with the comms. Give the young people an opportunity to help with the branding, leading on messaging, things like that. And from a group point of view, I'm grateful that I've been portfolio assistant to 2 cabinet members. I'm now chairing committees and I'm helping run our social media. But that's taken me years and years of building up my own profile to then go, can I have an opportunity to help? And I think we need to flip that around, because from a council's point of view, there is so much benefit from giving people with that natural talent, the natural ability to do these things, the opportunity. And I always say this, a young person, 9 times out of 10, will not only deliver what you want, but they'll excel, because they're trying to impress. Young people don't get many opportunities in life. We're always having to, it feels like work twice as hard to get half in reward. A young person will normally not let you down. And that's coming from someone who was on the dance floor at 5 a.m. this morning and still made it here for this panel.
Well, I'm sure you weren't the only one in this audience who was there, actually, by the looks of some people. Henry, do you want to go next?
Sure. and I've learned my lesson about going out late before I have an early morning panel because I missed last year's. We elect, people think that we elect local councillors to collect their bins, run civic events, oversee beautification programmes, and all of the other things that people traditionally associate with local government. This week, Kent Reform UK Group has announced the end of its Doge programme. It was elected thinking there was going to be a huge amount of fat to cut, and instead, alas, they're going to be raising council tax. The interesting thing, if you look at Kent County Council's budget, they've got a breakdown for every £100 what's spent on what. The amount spent on community services is £2 in every £100. Why? Because about half, if not more, of Kent County Council's budget is spent on statutory obligations imposed by Westminster. This is something which I believe in the case of social care started under George Osborne, Send might have been a bit later. But effectively what's happened since 2010 is that local government has been quietly annexed by the national welfare state. And voters haven't realised this, and indeed politicians collude in helping them not to realise it. During the local elections in May, Kemi Badenoch, giving an interview, she said, this is not about Westminster, this is about who collects your bins and all the rest of it, when actually it's about who runs your care homes and who is responsible for stumping up for special and educational needs. Yeah. Now, the problem with this is that effectively Westminster has externalised the cost implications of these policies, which means inevitably these policies have been incredibly generous because they don't show up on the Treasury's projections, right? Treasury involvement in things like social care and Send is done through grants mostly, which means that one, it's a controlled cost, there's no endless upward chart, but two, the Chancellor gets to sound like a good person every time they announce a new wad of cash. But at the same time, as groups like the Local Government Association and others have tracked, the share of council budgets, which is now completely out of local democratic control, is about half, depending on the council. The County Council's network, I can't really find a source for this figure. The County Council's network says more than 60%. That might reflect the difference between council and borough and is it borough and county? Borough and county councils. So we talk about setting local government free. I think that there should be a very basic democratic principle, even if you believe in devolution, which is that the level of government responsible for setting policy in a given area should be the level of government responsible for paying for it. Now, that doesn't mean getting rid of administrative devolution. It might make sense to have councils responsible for overseeing bits of the welfare state. But if Westminster is going to be setting the policy, and we're going to have a national policy, that means that we should have a national, that it should be funded by the Treasury. Or if they're going to devolve it to local councils, let local councils set their own policy in accordance with local priorities. Let voters decide whether or not they want to spend more money on care homes, exactly how generous they want their Send special educational needs programme to be. Because if we don't do that, what happens is that we end up, there's a wonderful project in the US called the Fiscal Democracy Project, which is effectively what share of the government budget, the federal budget in this case, is actually under the day-to-day democratic control of Congress. And it has shrunk every year and is now well less than a third of the budget. It'd be quite complicated to do that for local councils, but I'm willing to bet it would tell a similarly bleak story. So if you want to set councils free, it's quite simple. Either give them the legal right to cut their special needs budgets and focus their priorities, or take those costs back onto government books and let councils focus on what people think they focus on, which is making our towns, neighbourhoods, communities better places to live.
A more transparent funding of local authorities. Thank you, Henry. Abby.
Thank you. And in a way, Henry's kind of nicely set me up there, I think, for this, because as a local authority councillor, I made a deliberate decision to stand locally rather than go and be a national politician, and therefore you have to be pragmatic in terms of how you deal with exactly what Henry describes there. So I don't need to tell you all, because Henry's done it for me, that local authorities, whether it's a two-tier or a unitary, where I'm a council, we deliver over 800 services, and approximately 75 to 80% of our budget is going on social care, looking after the most vulnerable in our communities. But we also do all the other stuff as well, responsible for creating the conditions for economic growth, playing our parts in creating safe, happy, healthy neighbourhoods, and so on and so forth. And of course we have a democratic mandate to do that, but there is also an element of being that delivery arm for the government of the day in terms of what they want to do. Now, clearly, as I've chosen to be a local councillor as opposed to an MP, I'm a big fan of local government. I think localism is really great, and actually, do you know what? I think what I do is far more exciting than going to Parliament, because I can actually make a difference every day to residents' lives. However, I also see lots of local authorities not only being tied up by Whitehall red tape, but tying themselves up around this, which is perhaps why I find it so exciting, because I'm keen to understand how you can do what you want to do without getting tied up in red tape. And I guess the sweet spot is that balance between what national government want you to do versus what your local mandate is to do with that, and how you then go forward and deliver on that, bearing in mind all those constraints. And I remember years ago when I first became deputy leader of my council, Greg Clark delivered a speech. Greg Clark at the time, for those who are same age as Matthew, might not remember, that he was our Secretary of State for Local Government, and he gave a speech to the Conservative Council Association saying about how actually local government is where politicians make decisions, and the best MPs are the ones who have come from local government and have understood that power to deliver. But I would also say that it requires from elected politicians the confidence to push back on what is happening nationally. Yes, we absolutely should be looking after our most vulnerable, and I will often be heard saying in my own council that I believe our most important responsibility is looking after children and young people, and all councillors should be cognisant of their responsibility as a corporate parent. But I also think there is an opportunity to push back on conventional wisdom when you're being told by other people that this is just what you've got to do. I'm not an employee of the council. I have respect for our professional officers, but I was elected for a reason, and I'm going to challenge on that. I'm going to do that every day that I'm there. So with my national hat on as deputy leader of the Conservative group at the LGA, I went out and I saw some good examples of Conservative councils doing exactly that. So one of them is North Lincolnshire, a really well-run Conservative council up on the coast, where I was there talking to their leader recently about waste collections, and this is coming down the line for all of us in terms of the government's directive to change things. And the leader said to me, he said, my officers came and they said we should have X many bins, and I said, why? And actually they are going to move forward with, I think, 3 bins altogether, because actually you don't have to do necessarily in the way that you've been directed what's there, and we need more leaders like Rob Waltham in North Lincolnshire who are questioning their officers about whether actually the legislation says what officers interpret it is saying in a very well-meaning way, but fundamentally residents do not want 7 different bins, do they? We want to simplify things. Another one I would give as a great example is Suffolk, where they've used AI. Lots of councils using AI at the moment, particularly around social care, which seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but there is also a responsibility for us as local councils to push back on that societal narrative, again, in a way, as Henry said, which is talking about the statutory services that we have to deliver, but also challenging people's views around how we do that. So years ago, when my gran fell over and broke her hip, she was in hospital for 2 weeks. Today, you're out of hospital really quick, because actually we know, albeit we don't talk about it probably enough, that it's better to be at home than it is to be in hospital. You stand a far greater chance of getting poorly being in hospital than you do being in your own home. We want people to go home, we want them to be independent. But unsurprisingly, you're going to need more care around you if you're discharged from hospital with a broken hip at the beginning than you probably will in 4 weeks' time. But that's quite a difficult conversation to have with family who feel that the morning and evening care calls should carry on in perpetuity. But actually we want people to be stronger. We want them to come out of hospital home quickly, to become more independent, to be strong enough to look after themselves in 3 or 4 weeks' time, not to have that wraparound care package for the rest of their lives. We want them to be strong and able to look after themselves. And actually there is a responsibility for us as local government leaders to tackle that societal narrative around that, and being very upfront about the fact that we cannot continue to provide wraparound care when Granny actually is quite strong and quite capable of looking after herself after a few weeks of doing the physiotherapy that she needs to do with possibly the aids that we put in place. And finally, I guess what I would wrap up with saying, to go back to North Lincolnshire, is that interestingly, the better your social care is, the less it costs. And in places like North Lincolnshire, where they do have excellent children's services and they have really good adult social care, they have been able to not only push back in terms of, well, why do we have to do this? Is that actually what the law says around this? Can we do it differently? But they're also starting to push back on some of those statutory requirements that are eating into budgets, which is why, actually, as a local authority councillor, you should be interested in social care. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Jason.
Thank you very much indeed. I was waiting for Abby to say Croydon was a fantastic example, but she didn't. So,
Jason.
I mean, it's great to be here. Thank you very much. I've been a local authority councillor since 1994 in Croydon, and the elected mayor since 2022. So a long period spent in local government. And like Abby, I chose to be in local government. I didn't want to be an MP. It wasn't a stepping stone to another place. And I think local government is treated as the poor relation to government, whereas we're a distinct element of government. We're serving the people directly, and we deliver services that people very much rely upon. And I think we're actually closest to the people, closest to our residents. And as Henry listed off, social care, housing, planning, bins, potholes, all of those things that really matter to residents. But all too often we are stifled by diktat from Whitehall and new burdens with no money to follow through. And all too often councillors and officers are spending far too much of their time dealing with bid submissions, dealing with form filling, dealing with target watching, essentially fighting our corner at all times. And whereas we actually want to spend more time delivering quality, cost-effective services for our residents. And that's what we're trying to do in Croydon. I took over in 22 from a failing, bankrupt Labour council, and we're trying to turn that council around. But frankly, the government is not helping. We're trying to stabilise finances, protect and restore services, restore pride in our local area, and the government just isn't doing its bit. And under this current government, if you're an improving Conservative council like Croydon, you're sent commissioners. If you're a failing Labour council like Warrington, you're sent envoys.
Yep.
So there's a very different treatment of local authorities from government itself. And I think there needs to be a more grown-up conversation with government about the different roles that we play and how we interplay with one another. And if we talk about some of the burdens, and Henry touched on the many issues that we have to deal with as a council, and homelessness is one of those. And virtually every council in London is overspent on homelessness, and probably many across the country. Yet, if we try to deliver social housing as a local authority, we are pegged by government at housing allowance rates at 2011 rates, 90% of that too. But if you're a housing association, you're allowed to use 2025 rates. So there's an unfairness in the system before we even start. So many of us as local authorities could be building housing, but we can't do it because the rents don't stack up and don't allow it to be affordable. And that's one of those areas where government really is holding us back. And if we were set free from such regulation, we could do an awful lot more. EHCPs, another burden on councils, and we hear a lot about that at the moment, special educational needs transport. Again, a burden on the council. We have to deliver what the EHCP says, but we do not have the funding to support that. And again, another area where virtually every council in London and many besides are overspent trying to tackle that particular area. So as a council, for us in Croydon, we're trying to innovate and do things in a different way. We have a transformation plan that we hope to be the most efficient council in London. We're looking to drive £50 million of savings out over the next 4 years, greater use of AI, greater use of technology, working more closely with the voluntary and community sector. And it's simple things, giving social workers tablets so they can actually do their casework while they're with their client. Whereas at the moment, probably most local authorities go back to base to fill in their paperwork. And using transcription services as well, something that not many local authorities do. So it's kind of getting with the times to some degree, but we need to be free to have the time and the space to transform what we do as local authorities, to think outside of the box. And all too often, central government is very much keeping us in the box. And that's the relationship that we really need to change if we're going to have successful local government here in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And Callum?
Yeah, I think the panel's spot on with a lot of the central government problems knocking on to local authorities, but I don't want to let them off the hook entirely, because there's a lot that they can change in the current framework that they're not doing. There are now a record number of town hall bosses earning over £100,000 a year. It's up to 3,906, with 238 taking home more than the Prime Minister. And I'm glad that the panel's not a discussion on who deserves it the least, because I'm not sure I could answer that one. But beyond the bumper pay packets, there are almost laughable examples of waste. The most on-the-nose case is bankrupt Birmingham, who are now into the 7th month of a bin strike. And the inevitable pile-up of rubbish has led to an explosion in the rat population, which to deal with, the council has spent £416,000 on pest control, or roughly equivalent to the salary of 14 bin men. I don't know how many skips it would pay for, but I also assume that would be a better solution. Birmingham received over 11,000 complaints in the first 4 months of this year, presumably about the mountains of rubbish and the rats. They're not, however, alone in irritating their residents. Councils up and down the country are reporting a rise in the number of complaints, and at a higher rate than through population growth alone. And I think a major reason for this is the falling satisfaction with council staff, and the more relaxed standards that councils are taking towards their staff. Kick-started by the pandemic, councils have allowed staff to work from abroad more than 2,000 times since 2020, with 731 requests approved in the last year alone. 226 have been granted during the financial year. Approved abroad locations have included Dubai, Australia, Ibiza and Barbados. And given the glorious weather here, I really can't see the appeal to any of those places. Spearheading this less is more approach to work has been South Cambridgeshire District Council, who had been conducting a 4-day week experiment since January 2023 running to July. What was supposed to be a 3-month trial went on for 2.5 years, with councillors only finally given a vote in July this year. Under the scheme, staff were given an extra day off per week with no loss of pay. The council then ran a public consultation earlier this year which claimed improvements, including on agency spend, applications to fill vacancies and staff wellbeing. However, the residents and businesses in the area slammed the council in the survey responses. In the resident survey, 9 services had experienced a decline in satisfaction, with 4 areas showing no improvement at all. Not a single survey saw improvements across any area. The services include bin collections, council tax service, and the customer contact centre. The business survey was likewise dire for the council, where not a single service reported an improvement in satisfaction levels in the 10 categories asked about. A whistleblower actually disclosed to us that working there now felt isolating, and with staff alternating between Mondays and Fridays off, in practice it was a 3-day week. I don't doubt that there are many talented and committed staff working in South Cambridgeshire and in councils up and down the country, but the fact is that they're in a system run by councils that does not allow for success and often makes a waste of taxpayers' money inevitable. Councils are responsible for many of the bread and butter jobs of government, filling potholes, collecting bins, sweeping the streets and so on. It is often these simple jobs where failure is so apparent though, and it's why councils get so much of the ire from residents. It's completely true that councils have been overburdened by central government, placing a mounting workload of social care responsibilities on them while not keeping funding up at the same rate. This just makes frivolous waste even more of a scandal though. Councils must focus on getting the basics right. Their priorities should be answering phone calls of residents, keeping the roads drivable and having an adequate bin collection service. At the very least, and it's really remarkable that this is a requirement, council staff should be working in the country and ideally at the council offices. So let councils focus on this. More bin men and fewer EDI roles, more phone calls answered and fewer staff networks, more frontline staff and fewer fat cats. And with this should come the central government either taking back control or taking back the funding of social care issues and allowing councils to better allocate their budgets more autonomously. Councils shouldn't be held captive by poor policy from Westminster, but we can't let this poor government policy blind us from seeing the town hall disasters up and down the country either.
Thank you, Callum. Just before I hand it over to you guys in the audience, I just wanted to abuse the position of chair of this panel and ask Jason, Abby and Matthew a question, which is, if Kemi were in the room right now, what's one policy you would ask her to implement at a national level that would help you at the local level? So one way to decentralise to help you.
I would pick up on my comment with regard to LHA rates 2011. For our council, that's worth 11 million per year. And that's similar for all London councils and indeed across the country, and that would make a clear difference for us in Croydon.
Abby.
I'd probably go for something incredibly unsexy around children's social care, in terms of how do we balance the crippling cost of agency social workers within the constraints of recognising that whilst there's nothing wrong with having agency staff. Actually, a lot of local authorities are held captive by what is actually quite a poor market around that.
Matthew.
sort out the funding model. Stop punishing councils for doing well. Stop punishing councils for trying to change and improve things. I'm fed up of every single discussion, every single council. The majority of our budget is on adult social care and on special education's need. If we could sort those two areas out, think of the millions and millions and millions of pounds that we could be investing. And every party, we, Labour, play politics with the funding model. We need to change it. We need to absolutely rip it up and start again effectively, because it's just not working. And what we're going to see in the coming months when we move to these 3-year settlements is baking in the punishment. Baking in, if you're a successful council, or if you're a Conservative council, frankly, you're going to have far less money baked in for the next 3 years. Tough luck, get on with it. So the funding model needs change. And I've spoken to her, previous party chairmans about it before, previous Secretary of State for local government. I've spoken to so many of them that every single person promises that we're going to deal with it. We need a plan. We need to deal with it, because it's going to bankrupt more and more councils, not through their own fault, but because they're just underneath the waterline.
So now we're going to hand it over to you guys. We'll hand it over to you guys in the audience. Now, there's a couple of roving mics coming around, so just wait until one of those reaches you. If you could let us know your name, and if your question is for a particular panellist, just let us know who. So, Ben, we've got the gentleman right here in the white shirt.
Thank you. My name is Tom. I'm chair of the Guildford Conservatives. Thank you for all your comments. Quick observation, it sounds like that balance of rights and responsibilities is totally out of kilter. Lots of responsibilities, no rights to do anything about what's required. But my question is, I haven't heard anybody talk about, are we trying to do too much? I'm a Conservative, small government, competent government, compassionate government, but small. I haven't heard any comments about whether we're overstretching what we should be delivering. I'd welcome your comments. Thank you.
Who wants to take that one first? Matthew.
And so actually, one of the things I first did when I became a councillor was try explain to people how much we do. And I agree with you. In Harrow we run over 600 services. It's about £700 million a year. People can only ever name potholes, bins, fly tipping. That's it. People cannot name all the other things we do. So I agree. I think there is an element where we have to go, do you know what? It's not the council's job. It's not our job anymore. And obviously that's going to take legislation change. It's going to take a lot of things that need doing. Whenever I'm in meetings in the council, I play speeches like it's Prime Minister's questions. I play meetings like they're cabinet meetings, and I ask questions as if I'm grilling people. Because I always say to people, Harrow, when we took over, we were 12 months away from going financially bankrupt. We've managed to turn things around, but we're still right there on the edge. And so I say to officers when they come up with these policies of what we're going to do and all these extra things and stuff like that, I say, right, we're not able to offer the cappuccino with the chocolate sprinkles and the marshmallows. We can literally offer you a black coffee right now. We cannot afford more. And so I agree. I think there's got to be a real honest question about how much councils are asked to do, because if you ask people out there, what do we do? They cannot name all 600 services.
Henry.
I mean, I, for one, look forward to the day when we relieve councils of the burden of planning. That's going to be a great day. But on this, I think that it's an interesting question about what you do about small government, because I think that this is actually the case. I've mentioned in my speech about whether or not you make Westminster take on the funding for some of these policy areas that are currently statutory obligations, or whether or not you devolve the right to make policy for them to councils. Now, I think the default position would be that you give it to Westminster because they're ruinously expensive and all the rest of it. But I think that the small government thing is actually potentially a reason to go with option B. Because the way that we currently do welfare spending in this country is that we never set budgets for it. We have an entitlement-led approach where we create a framework for whether or not you're entitled to the money. Yep. And then we discover how much it costs. And this has the inevitable consequence of sending those trajectories all the way up to the moon. Yeah. And the only way that you really, setting yourself unlimited obligations when you have limited means is mad, but that is how we do welfare. Mm-hmm. And I think that the interesting thing about properly devolving parts of the welfare state to local government, and I've got a little thing on this later with Bright Blue actually, because I've just done an essay on it, is that you would have a fixed budget, right? It could be there could be a funding arrangement with Westminster, but you could say this is the pot, right? This is the full size of the money, and then you would decide how much do we want to spend on welfare policy, how much do we want to spend on adult social care, and I think that you'd get a very, very different sort of welfare politics and welfare policy if your starting point was not who do we think in the abstract deserves help, but how much money have we actually got to help people? Yeah. And that would also have some other virtues. The previous pre-national welfare system had many virtues. I think it would be much easier to combat fraud on a local level. I think it would also be much more obvious that welfare fraud is not a victimless crime. I think when people are defrauding a national bureaucracy, too often the national treasury is just viewed as inexhaustible, whereas if you were literally sort of stealing from your friends and neighbours in your community, that would maybe be a harder thing to do. So it is a really good question. I suspect that genuinely the best way to get smaller government at local level is to devolve policy responsibility to town halls.
Abby.
It is a fascinating question, isn't it? Because I think when we all examine ourselves in terms of what do we believe as conservatives, and there is that natural thing isn't always for small government. And I find myself often challenged with this. So I come from Stoke-on-Trent. It's never been a conservative hotbed. When I was first elected, we were in a Rainbow Coalition, and within 12 months, every one of my colleagues lost their seat except me. I was the leader of a group of 2. AGMs were very quick for several years. However, within 4 years, we'd gone to 7, and I was the deputy leader of the council. And then 4 years later, I became the leader of the council, and I was faced with the challenge that actually we needed to intervene. So whilst, yes, of course, I believe passionately in a small state and all those things, the reality is that if I wanted to make a success of my leadership there, then I had to intervene, which I think then goes back to a word I've heard a few times actually over the last couple of days: what works conservatism. The reality is if I'd have accepted true pure conservative values, then I would have done nothing as leader of Stoke-on-Trent City Council, because I didn't believe in doing those things. But actually I'm passionate about my place, and I believe that I was the best person to lead the council, and therefore as long as I carefully managed those interventions around that until a place where we were in a different state, then it was the right thing to do. So I intervened in regeneration, I built hotels, I built private sector residential, I set up a housing company, I led inward investment, I secured the largest settlement ever of the largest levelling up settlement, the second largest movement of civil servants into my city, and did all those things, doing things that we shouldn't really be doing, actually, if we believe in small statism. But I think the other part is also then the need to push back on things. I also challenged my own government about asylum policy. Why were we expected to accept asylum seekers into Stoke-on-Trent, yet nobody else was? Why couldn't we opt out of being a voluntary place? Why were we being told that voluntary didn't actually mean voluntary any longer? Equally, on the other hand, we pushed hard on heritage protection. Lots of residents will write to you and say, you've got fantastic heritage properties, why aren't you doing more as a council? Well, simply, we've got lots of other things to do. But the reality is, the fines are absolutely pitiful. They're absolutely pitiful if you own a heritage building and you're not looking after it in the way that you ought to, and we push back on that as well and managed to secure a change in the law so the fines actually hit the pockets of building owners. So I think it's a challenge. I think, yes, you can ask the question and respond in the way that Matthew has suggested, which is we can do too much because I think we want to do motherhood and apple pie. But I think you also have to be a brave leader sometimes and step in if you're passionate about your place. And I think you can reconcile the two things.
Jason.
Thank you. I mean, building on what Abby said, I'm passionate about my place of Croydon and rebuilding Croydon, my hometown. But I think when you are actually in control running a council, you do have to be more pragmatic. You do have to intervene in things that perhaps naturally, as a Conservative, you wouldn't wish to do, and intervene in markets. And regeneration is a key example of that. We're driving a lot of work in regeneration in Croydon, £40 million of public money going into public realm, etc., to create and curate a place which then investment will follow, kind of build it and they will come mentality. That said, when I came into office in 22, I inherited a bankrupt Labour council, and one of the mantras that we have worked on is that we will be a council that does less, but what we do will do well, because the council was doing everything they possibly could. Open doors everywhere, come in, we'll give you services. So we are having to cut back, and we are shrinking what we do, and a couple of examples of that is adult learning. In Croydon, the council runs, and probably many councils across the country, runs adult learning. It's a budget from the GLA, but we're running it, staffing it, doing all those things, when we've got several HE establishments in the borough that could run it perfectly well and probably better. And extra care housing. We're all passionate about housing, good quality housing, but extra care housing, I've got many housing associations that successfully run extra care housing. We're running it and doing it quite badly, frankly, so we need to hand that over to the experts and let them do it. So there are areas where we can pull back, be smaller council, but what we do, we do well.
Callum.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true that all levels of government are doing too much. I think the problem that councils will find, though, is that partly because of statutory requirements from the government is that they can't actually stop doing a lot of the services, meaning that when individual councillors are elected, it's sort of a bit pointless to actually lobby them because, as Abby said, they can't do much about it because the government says you have to do this, or they just wouldn't get elected in the first place. It will have to be a massive policy shift coming from the top of the Conservative Party first.
Yeah.
Let's go to someone on this side of the room. Emma, the gentleman right next to you there.
Hello, thank you very much. I'll go backwards in time. I'm the current chair of the Socialist Republic of Brighton and Hove, and I was the group leader until 2019 when Theresa May's election did for me. Going backwards, though, the thing that strikes me most is in 2007 I was a new councillor, and we managed to even up the council and we took administration, but I sat at the back of the room with 27 councillors, and none of them, and I actually am quite depressed about the conversation from the chairs actually there, from the board, because I spent 4 years shouting about, let's cut the budget, let's slash it. What officers will do to you, and this is the other hundreds of councillors across the country, they will always play to your vanity. You can cut £3 million from Labour wasteful spending, but they will always present you with money. Oh, councillor, wouldn't you like to spend some money on this? Wouldn't you like to spend some money on that? And before we knew it, we were spending more money than the previous Labour administration.
Yep.
Us as Conservatives, we really must get to grips with the fact that the local finance is so opaque that we don't understand it, but officers do. They will then come and present us with all sorts of things for our vanity. We will then say, oh yes, we'd like to do that. Councillors are often so weak, not you people, but the people that are also elected are so weak that they go with the easy option and say, okay, I'd like to spend that. That's going to make me look really good in front of my electors, and we end up spending more money than Labour. Somehow that has got to stop.
The experience of being councillor versus the officials. Anyone want to take that one on?
I think kind of going back to, Croydon, I inherited I'm essentially a Conservative running a Labour council, if you can imagine that. And we're trying to turn that around and make it into a Conservative council again. And I think that, I understand how local government finance works. I work with my officers. Officers will suggest things and I will say, no, we are not doing that. It's about the priorities of the council, the priorities of the administration, and, going out and campaigning, listening to your residents, understanding what their concerns are, and delivering those through your manifesto commitments, etc. So any kind of spending, and there's very little spending in Croydon because we're a borough in intervention and huge debt burden, etc. But any spending is on our priorities to deliver for our residents in Croydon. And it's about how we can reduce spend. Every year we are cutting our budgets. In the last 3 years, 160 million cut from our budgets, another 30 million this year, another 20 million next year. So we are very much cutting year on year on year, reorganising year on year. So I would probably push back on the fact that the officers are playing to I'm not very vain, so they're not doing very well playing to my vanity. But I would push back a little bit on that where we are in control, we're pushing and making those differences.
Abby.
So I would deal with this in a slightly different way. And for me, again, Jason and I have both said this, we've chosen to be local councillors, but anyone in the room who's a local councillor will know that the first thing that people say to you is, when do you want to be an MP? Like, that's the most glamorous job in the world and you can do so much doing it. I like being a local councillor. I think you can do incredible things doing it. But actually, I think I would say that the organisations that I'm involved with, the LJ Conservative Group and also the Conservative Council Association, we value the role of councillors, but I do sometimes question whether the wider party always understands that and therefore what support we should give to our elected members. We do lots of really great training. The CCA in particular is really good at this in terms of how to get elected, but do we actually think about the people we want to stand and actually how we support them to deal with exactly the issue that was raised there, which is how do you work with officers? One of the things that we do at the LGA is we work with groups, whether they're in administration or opposition, in terms of learning those basic skills. And that's done across all the parties on a non-political basis, although clearly, you are sent to your relevant party. But I think there is something for us as a political party to consider about the role of local councillors. Unfortunately, when you look at our our opponents, particularly Labour and the Lib Dems, sometimes I question whether they've got a better grip on this, and therefore more emphasis on the value that they place on local councillors, the role that we perform, and that it isn't necessarily for all of us viewed as the starting rung of a career to go on to something better. It's okay to be a councillor. It is really enjoyable, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying that you just want to be a local councillor. In fact, we should be praising our local councillors more. Conservative councillors should be far more valued within our party than they are at the moment. Yep. And there should be a greater recognition. I think, I'm very lucky to be able to every week be part of the Blue Team. We meet with the Shadow Secretary of State. Our previous Shadow Secretary of State is now the party chairman, and we have a fantastic relationship with him as a result of that. And I can't say that they're rude to me ever, even when we were in government, but actually I do think we need to get back to grassroots. The reality is, finally, because I'm on a bit of a hobby horse here, aren't I? Do you know that we never, ever get the keys to number 10 Downing Street until we are the largest party in local government? When you think about that, we need to have far more Conservative councillors, because we will absolutely never get back into government until we do that. I think the party needs to think about how it therefore works with candidates, with councillors, with Conservative-led councils to ensure that we get those keys back.
Matthew.
I'll keep it short and sweet. It's what I said earlier on. I think we need to be promoting people who are willing to scrutinise, who are willing to basically really politicise local government. As I said, every speech I make in the council is like it's Prime Minister's questions, and I get our team motivated and rallied and going up. I'm just a backbencher. I'm not a cabinet member. I'm not a leader. I'm purely a backbencher who does a good political speech. Every single meeting is grilling and scrutinising. If you cannot explain to me why we are doing this, then I'm not going to support it. And I'm doing that purely of my own accord, purely because that's what I think the level needs to be. And I think actually there's a discussion here about, leaders of groups and leaders of councils upping the bar and upping the standards of people that we have in local government. Because you're completely right. I sit in those council meetings where we have, 31 councillors, 6 people will bother speaking. The rest sit silently, wait until it says on the whips list how to vote. And that's not a criticism of my colleagues, but I feel like local government is the place where, as you said earlier on, Abby, it's the place where important decisions are made. Frankly, at the end of the day, it's us as local councillors who keep your streets tidy. It's us as local councillors who resurface your roads. It's not the Member of Parliament. It's not the government. It is us. We are responsible of everything from the moment a resident opens their eyes in their area. I actually think, and I agree with what you're saying, Abby, I think local councillors need massive, massive appreciation in this party, because we do so much unheard and unseen.
Let's go for another question on this side. Yes, gentleman here in the white shirt. Yep.
Hi, good morning. My name's Peter. My question to the panel is, how can we improve procurement practices for local government? Because one thing I've seen continuously is decisions that are made of contract variation, and what that means is that council gives a contract to an external company to deliver services, and then they come back and say, oh, here's a load of additional costs, which were unforeseen. It goes above a 10% threshold within the council's procurement contract, and then the council's stuffed, because they either say, oh, well, okay, we're going to put the contract back out to tender. That's going to cost more than just folding and saying we're just going to give these companies what they want. And then the companies know this, so then we can just go back and do the same trick again and again and again. Is there a way of getting out of that loophole and actually saving some money that way? Thank you.
Henry, do you want to start on this one?
Local government. I won't obviously go into the granular details, which I obviously know, but I'll leave it to the councillors. But I think that in terms of government contracts in general, it's a tricky one, because on the one hand, it often looks like these companies are fleecing. In national contracts, you get these huge companies with these huge contracts, and it looks like they're fleecing the government. And then occasionally one of them goes bankrupt, and you're left, like so often in British politics, you're like, okay, if this is a cartel, it's a very inept cartel, because most members of cartels don't collapse the way that sort of Cisco did. And it is if you don't, because if there are often relatively few companies in a given area that can deliver a certain service, that might be more flexible in local government because the contracts are smaller. But in national government, after the post office scandal, people were asking, why on earth are we giving this company more government IT contracts? And the blunt answer was, well, there are 3 companies on earth that can service government IT contracts on this scale, and it is one of them, right? And so if you imposed no cost overruns, well, often, I don't need to say this at the TPA, but government projects can be very inefficient. And then if there are cost overruns and the company has to eat them, maybe that company ends up in trouble itself. So it's easy to demonize. I think often British politics is the quest for villains, external baddies upon whom all our problems can be blamed. And maybe that is the case in local government. But I think that it's almost insoluble. You could try and do more things in-house. You could try and pay for better contract negotiators. That's another problem the government often has. One of the reasons it does get rinsed is because being a good commercial contract negotiator is something in the private sector that will make you lots of money. And then on the government side, you're slotted into a public sector pay band that is nowhere near it, and so you end up getting outmaneuvered. So maybe there are things you can adjust at the edges, but I guess I would just counsel against, maybe some of the companies are bad, not all of them are.
Callum, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think government at all levels has been pretty bad at negotiating in the UK. I think, look at recent examples from Westminster. But a big problem that councils have, as well as sort of the NHS and schools, is that they just have to jump through hoops to show that they've done due diligence on something. So quite often for academy schools, they just have to get 3 quotes on a particular thing and then go with the cheapest quote. It's like, do they know if that's the best option? No, they don't. I think rewarding councils that can negotiate well and as a way to then reward the staff that have negotiated on that would possibly be a better way to go about it, rather than just jumping through hoops to show that they've done due diligence.
Abby?
In a way, I think this comes back to some of the things we talked about earlier. And I've got to say, procurement is blamed as a kind of big spectre in the corner so often by councillors who don't actually really understand what it fundamentally is and what the opportunities are around it. So I think there's something about knowing your market, which you would task your officers to do. Back to Matthew's point about are you challenging in terms of this. And then as we were talking about before, actually sometimes there is a need to intervene because, as Henry points out, that maybe the market is not as developed and there is a role there for you in the short term as a local authority leader to ensure that you have the right market for there. Now, I'm conscious there's only 50 minutes left, so I'm not going to let Callum off the hook with his cheap jibe about local authority chief executives, because Henry has just picked this up. In fact, so has Matthew. You get what you pay for. I always think it's a massive red herring. Oh, sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. It's a massive red herring to say chief execs of councils get paid more than the Prime Minister. Yeah, but the Prime Minister doesn't actually do the same job as a chief exec of the council. That's what the Cabinet Secretary does. And the reality is, £100,000 is not a huge amount of money for somebody who is managing over 5,000 members of staff and will immediately lose their job if a child that they've never met and in a case that they've never seen dies. And yes, the leader of the council probably will lose their role too, but so will the chief exec. You get what you pay for at the end of the day. So I think we have to be realistic about some of these things, that if you pay peanuts, you're going to get monkeys, but there is also a role for local authority councillors to ensure that they are also challenging around this.
Callum, I'll give you the right of reply on that in case you want it.
Yeah, I think chief executives are not sacked enough at councils, and they stay in place for far too long, and it's not the sort of it's not the turnover you see at a Fortune 500 company, even though they're often dealing with the budgets of it. Sure, their bonuses are not quite as high and their salary might not be quite as high. I don't think it's the case that council chief execs are doing a harder job than people in the top level of the cabinet. I also don't think it's a sort of defence to say, well, if something really, really bad happens, they'll get sacked. So, well, poor performance should result in more sackings, and it doesn't.
Matthew, I think you wanted to jump in.
I just wanted to come back on procurement and almost chief executives. Can we stop having a merry-go-round of failing chief executives as well? Can we stop passing failure to another council to deal with, and because they're a new chief executive, they get another year or two to see what they can do? We actually, like with procurement, sometimes if someone does something wrong, that should be it. We should rip the contract up. I'm always of the opinion that if I can't see the value for money, I don't mind taking the hit on the head when it comes to the cost to rip things up and start again. But I know that's not always possible. As has been said, there are only a certain number of suppliers in some markets. But on the chief executive point, I actually think we need to think of it like procurement. You want the best person you can for your council, but as soon as someone has failed at a council or not lived up to the expectations at that council, they get a free ride to another council down the road. And ironically, it's like, no offence to if there's any ministers in the room or listening, it's like shadow secretaries of state or ministers. You fail upwards, you fail sideways, you move around to a different department, you get another 6 months to try your hat. So, like with procurement, I think sometimes we have to, as the elected officials who are the ones who have to face the ballot box, say, these are our standards, and if you fall below it, there's no ifs, no buts.
Jason.
Just on procurement, I think procurement is one of those dark arts that it's very difficult for any council to negotiate. probably two things I would say on it. The first one is that as councils, we tend to prescribe what we want in our contract. We go out to market and we ask the market to respond, rather than have a conversation with the market about what can they do, what can they offer. And it's kind of that adopt, not adapt model, whereby the market could work slightly differently. If we did it the way they suggest, it would actually be cheaper for us, rather than things being bespoke for every council across the country. And then the other side of that is contract management. In Croydon, we've invested in contract management because there was no contract management. They took all the contract managers out as part of cuts, and all our costs went up and all our services went down. So we've reinstated contract managers to make sure our contractors are delivering what they're meant to be delivering.
Let's go for another question this side of the room. We'll come to this gentleman here, Emma.
Thank you. My name's Parish. I want to echo what somebody said over there in Brighton, and I wanted the opinion of the panel around council officers. Normally what you see is council officers almost dictating or guiding in a yes minister sort of fashion to councillors. So I agree with yourself, Abby. We need to have much more trained councillors, training and proficiency and expertise. I say that because council officers really do drive what the council does. So what's the panel's opinion on training more councillors, having more competent councillors, and to drive the council? And I say that having transformed over a dozen local authorities, because it's the officers who run it, and it's not the councillors, and we need to have much more effective leadership with councillors.
Yep.
And I'm also standing in May as well with my good friend here, Matthew.
Sounds like one for you to start on, Abby.
Yes, all day long, absolutely.
Yep.
I think the big challenge for us is, firstly, how do we help the party to recognise what more it can do? And I think there is also something around how do we encourage people who are standing to accept it. You know, I've had the pleasure of knowing some absolutely tremendous councillors who are really, really good. And when you say to them, would you like to have a little bit of training, not because you're not very good, they're kind of, oh, no, because you're suggesting I'm not very good. Well, I can tell you, having led a council in intervention for 4 years, that actually it's really lonely, and it's not necessarily about training. It is about knowing that you've got people you can talk to who don't actually know your place, and you want to phone them up and have a bit of a moan and a bitch about people in your group or officers or so on. And actually, I think we need to be a bit more comfortable with encouraging people to accept that sort of help. It's not about saying you don't know what you're doing. It's about why wouldn't we all want to be great at what we do? So I'm absolutely all over whatever sort of support that we can give to candidates and councillors. And there is loads of stuff out there through the LJ Conservative group once you get elected, but actually the CCA have a fantastic offer too.
Henry.
So the structural disadvantage that politicians are at versus officials nationally is permanence versus temporary, essentially. The civil service will always know their department better than the minister who gets cycled in for a couple of years, and it is very difficult. There are ways to do it, but it is very difficult to correct that fundamental thing. In local government, that's then compounded by the fact that most councillors are part-time. And so it's extraordinary that obviously you have a full-time executive often, but it's extraordinary that councillors can get a grip on what councils are doing at all a lot of the time. It's remarkable if you're doing it as a part-time thing and you've got this very complex organisation with very opaque financing. The ordinary council who can get a grip on its finances is a more diligent person than I'll ever be. The one thing I will say in defence, however, is that often, you know, when you complain, a lot of these compliance officers exist to come back to what we were talking about with setting councils free, because the compliance regime imposed by Westminster, right? Like there are all kinds of things where actually councils don't have freedom of manoeuvre, and the purpose of those compliance officers, tedious as they often are, is to go and say, well, there's a minefield, there's a minefield, there's a minefield, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. It's not them telling, well, they are literally telling them, but it's not the officials manifesting these rules. They're simply informing them of things that are being done by Westminster. And again, one of the things that I've taken on board, because I'm often very critical of the civil service, and then I got some civil service contacts, one of the things I've taken on board is civil servants and officials are very often get the blame when really the people who should get the blame are the people who programmed them, right? The people who hired them, the people who set up the rules that they're enforcing. So, yes, absolutely, there are ways to do it. I'd be interested to hear how you transformed 12 councils, but Westminster getting rid of some of the regulations and rules that restrict councils would be another way of de-empowering those officials.
Matthew.
All I'll say is don't forget who's the one who has to put their name on a ballot paper. That's my frustration. I agree that, the civil service are there permanently, the staff are there permanently, we come and go, councillors come and go. But it's the fact of councils should be officer run but councillor led. And at the end of the day, the decision has to lie with the person who's got that ballot paper with their name on it, because we're the ones who can get kicked out or not. And as we've said, it's hard sometimes to move chief executives on. It's hard to move senior management on. We've spent one of the biggest frustrations that we had taking over was the fact that we weren't even doing performance scorecards. So we took that over and put them straight back in, and we've managed to use that to manage people out. But that takes years and years. I wish that we had this silver bullet where we could go, right, you're gone. Yeah, just go. But at the end of the day, we need to remember, officer run, councillor led. It's us who have to face the electorate, not this civil servant that no one knows of or the chief executive that nobody's heard of.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, so let's try and get a couple of quick fire questions in. We've got the gentleman here at the front, Ben, and then, yes, this lady right next to you here, Emma. So yes, we'll start with you, Joe.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Nick, I'm from Gloucestershire, where we are about to embark on local government reorganisation. So we will be closing 7 district, borough, city councils and the county council, and setting up either 1 unitary or 2 unitaries, depending on how the plans go. So I'd just be interested to get the panel's view on unitary authorities, and in particular how you think that will pan out against some of the things you've highlighted in terms of spend cost. When you look at when local government reorganisation was first set out, the Labour government set it out as a money-saving scheme. I think quite quickly that's already unravelled. So I'd just be really interested to get your views on what reorganisation might look like in terms of budgets.
Perfect. And yes, you, Ben.
Thank you. Some splendid observations from the panel. I'm Charlotte Kenyon. I'm a West Sussex County Councillor, and I have tried, and I agree with things Matthew and Abby particularly have been saying, and I really like the strength with which you express your opinions, Matthew. I do think it's about confidence and leadership. So in my situation, there have been things I've challenged, be it procurement, processes, policies. I'm told it's an operational matter, it's not political. Well, I'm a politician and I think it's political. So whose decision is that? Yep. And the observation I'd like your sort of opinions on is, I can't make things happen if a civil servant says no, if I can't get my colleagues on the side. My observation is that an awful lot of our councillor colleagues think that it's about a very managerial approach, about running an efficient council, which absolutely we must. That's a hygiene factor. That's where it starts. But I don't think we're political enough, and I don't think in opposition that we're using our platform to offer leadership and showcase conservative policies. And how do I persuade my colleagues that that's what we've got to do in West Sussex County Council and elsewhere?
Matthew, do you want to start on that question?
Yeah, so I'm just going to be blunt. I have no idea, because we're a single borough council, so I won't be able to answer your question, so good luck with the rest of the panel. On your points, I completely agree. We have to get out of the idea that, officers can run free. They can't. We are the ones who are responsible at the end of the day. As I said earlier on to the other questions, it is about having that strength, as whether you're a group leader or an association chairman or a leader of a council, to raise the standards of your councillors. And I'm sorry, but no one has a God-given right to their seat. Until the nominations are handed in for the election, no one is guaranteed to be standing as a councillor. I may have been reselected for my seat for next year, but until nominations go in, I can be deselected. We have to start upping the standards. We have to start saying that this is what we expect. You are going to play ball. You are going to be a proper politician on a local government level, and you're going to be active. And I know that's hard, because most councillors do it as part-time, for fun, vocation. Most people, as Abby said, we need to get people away from this stepping stone to Parliament. But that doesn't mean we don't have any of them. And actually, I think if we start getting more people involved in local government, they'll go, do you know what? This is better than Parliament, because I can actually get stuff done here, whereas in Parliament, I'm sitting on the backbench doing nothing, not even in government.
We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have to ask for very brief responses now. No, that's all right. Henry, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So on specific finances, I've got no idea, but I will say that I think that it's unfortunate that we're making the decisions on mergers before we decide the funding settlement, because the proper size of local government depends on what you think local government should be doing and how it should be funded. So I quite like boroughs and so on, and they're quite more granular, but it might be it wouldn't work. But we are getting it the wrong way around. On political councillors, I think part of the problem is that councils don't have that much, because of the things we've been talking about in terms of statutory responsibilities, everything else. It is very managerial. There aren't all that many opportunities to, be a Conservative council versus a Labour council, much fewer than there were. I mean, I went to school in Buckinghamshire, so that's an exception because there is the cause, which is grammar schools.
Yep.
And that sort of bloods every single Conservative councillor, and they are fiercely political creatures. But other than that, I think that giving councils more freedom to actually set policy on things like welfare would mean you could have a real meaningful choice between a Labour and a Conservative council.
Abby.
Yes, very quickly. I think in terms of political councils, I think it's something about the mandate, isn't it? And it's amazing what you learn at the wrong end, isn't it? If only I knew everything I know now 15 years ago when I started. I think once you've got that mandate, I think there is something about that glue then, isn't there, amongst your group, and therefore particularly whether you're opposition or administration, what you follow. And because he's already told me off because I haven't plugged him, Croydon are great at this. It is never... even
What
if
about
you don't-
Harrow? What about Harrow?
Okay, sorry. And it is not too late either, because I go to some councils where I'm staggered that there is no mandate, and I look at the capital programme and other stuff, and they won and they find themselves there. So it's not too late if you're already there and you're looking at things. In terms of LGR, what I would say is I can't give you a prediction. I'm a unitary councillor, I think it's great, but we do have some fantastic examples of actually Conservatives who've done a brilliant job of this. Wiltshire, with Baroness Scott now, who she single-handedly, challenged our own government to deliver Wiltshire, which has been a successful council. Sadly, unfortunately, not Conservative-led at the moment, but I have no doubt it will be soon. Buckinghamshire, as Henry mentioned, large Conservative unitary. Somerset, sadly, a great plan brought forward, now being poorly executed by the Lib Dems, but actually Northumberland, again, big unitary authority, still Conservative-led and still doing really great stuff. So there is some good examples like that, but I do appreciate it's really scary.
And very finally, Jason.
Unitary all the way, but I think it should be with consultation, not imposition. So it's about what local residents want. And on the point around officers are there to work for the administration. Officers are there to deliver the manifesto of the administration. So if we can't make things happen and civil servants are saying no, then perhaps those civil servants, I'm going to sound like Callum now, perhaps those civil servants should be working somewhere else. Because if they're not delivering your manifesto, that's what they're there to do. And certainly in Croydon, we've had some staff changes in recent years.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are now out of time, I'm afraid. But thank you very much all for coming. And before you all go, could we thank the panel in the usual way?